On March 20, 2003, the United States invaded Iraq, declaring war on the country under the banner of the War on Terror. Although the stated goal of the invasion was to overthrow the regime of President Saddam Hussein and prevent Iraq from developing weapons of mass destruction, the consequences of the invasion proved to be far more profound and wide-ranging than initially anticipated. Iraq suffered widespread destruction of its infrastructure, political instability, cultural destruction, and massive human casualties. Background of the war. The official reason given by the United States and its allies for the invasion was the claim that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, a claim that was later proven to be false. The U.S. government also linked the Iraqi regime to al-Qaeda after the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. Despite the lack of substantial evidence supporting these allegations, the military campaign proceeded. Iraq had a long history of political and economic tensions, especially following the harsh international sanctions imposed on the country after its invasion of Kuwait in 1990. These sanctions severely weakened Iraq's economy and led to a deterioration in the living conditions of the Iraqi people. The U.S. invasion and occupation. On March 20, 2003, U.S. forces began their assault on Iraq, launching intensive airstrikes against Iraq's military and civilian infrastructure. Within a few weeks, Baghdad fell on April 9, 2003, and the Iraqi government collapsed. Following the fall of the capital, the U.S. decided to disband the Iraqi military and dismantle institutions associated with Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party. This decision had catastrophic consequences for the security and stability of the country. Initially, Iraq was plunged into near-total chaos. Widespread looting took place, with public and private property destroyed. While the U.S. and its allies sought to establish a new government in Iraq, it became evident that the overthrow of the former regime had left a gaping hole in the country's security and administrative systems. Political consequences. Politically, the invasion led to the dismantling of the Iraqi state. Paul Bremer, the U.S. administrator in Iraq, made the fateful decision to disband the Iraqi army in May 2003, a move that had serious consequences. Thousands of soldiers, military advisors, and civilian employees, who had formed the backbone of the Iraqi state, were dismissed from their positions, leaving the country in a state of security and administrative vacuum. Moreover, a radical change was imposed on Iraq's political structure. A new constitution was drafted under the supervision of the occupying forces, and elections were held in 2005. However, this new political system struggled to prevent the rise of sectarian and ethnic tensions, as the Shiites, Sunnis, and Kurds each vied for political power. The invasion also resulted in an increased influence of Iran in Iraq, as many Iraqi political figures turned to Iran for support in the wake of the occupation, deepening the political divisions in the country and giving rise to sectarian militias. Economic consequences. Economically, the invasion had a devastating impact. Iraq's infrastructure was almost completely destroyed, including roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, and power plants. The country's electricity grid was obliterated, leading to prolonged power and water shortages. This destruction, caused by indiscriminate bombing and ground operations, inflicted severe hardship on the Iraqi population. Furthermore, sanctions imposed on Iraq during the years following the invasion made it difficult for the country to recover economically. While oil production increased, much of the revenue generated from oil exports was used to finance the occupation and reconstruction efforts, leaving little room for improvements in living standards. Humanitarian consequences. One of the most tragic effects of the invasion was the human toll. It is estimated that hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians were killed as a result of military operations, airstrikes, and sectarian violence. Many more were wounded, and millions were displaced, either within Iraq or abroad. Children were among the most affected, with many losing parents and homes. The destruction of infrastructure further exacerbated the suffering, as hospitals were in ruins and medical care became increasingly scarce. Disease outbreaks spread as a result of the collapse of health and sanitation systems, and the Iraqi people faced increasing levels of poverty due to the widespread destruction of the economy. The invasion also led to a significant increase in mental health issues, with trauma and psychological scars affecting a generation of Iraqis. The lack of basic services and the constant threat of violence led to a deterioration in the quality of life for millions of Iraqis. Cultural consequences. Perhaps one of the most profound impacts of the invasion was the cultural destruction of Iraq. Iraq, with its rich history as the cradle of ancient civilizations such as Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria, saw the plundering and destruction of its cultural heritage. The Iraq National Museum in Baghdad, along with other cultural institutions, was looted and ransacked in the wake of the invasion. Priceless artifacts, some dating back thousands of years, were stolen or destroyed. In addition, the war severely impacted education and cultural life in Iraq. Schools were destroyed or repurposed as military barracks, and the cultural and artistic activities that once flourished in Iraq were severely curtailed. The absence of a secure environment, along with the destruction of critical infrastructure, made it increasingly difficult for the Iraqi people to engage in cultural expression, education, or the preservation of their history. U.S. military presence. The U.S. military remained in Iraq until 2011, but the long-term consequences of its presence in the country were deeply painful. Between 2003 and 2011, insurgent groups like Al-Qaeda in Iraq launched attacks against U.S. forces and Iraqi civilians alike. Later, the rise of the Islamic State, ISIS, in 2014 capitalized on the political and security vacuum left in the wake of the invasion and occupation. The Islamic State's rise to power marked a new chapter of violence in Iraq, as the group seized large parts of the country and declared the establishment of a caliphate. Despite the U.S. withdrawal in 2011, the instability caused by the invasion continued to haunt Iraq, with ISIS exploiting the fractured political and security situation. Conclusion. The U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a pivotal moment in the country's history, leaving a legacy of political, economic, cultural, and humanitarian devastation. While the U.S. officially withdrew from Iraq in 2011, the impacts of the invasion continue to reverberate through the country. Sectarian violence, cultural destruction, and a weakened economy are just some of the challenges that Iraqis still face today. The war on Iraq was more than just a military conflict, it was a tragedy that profoundly altered the lives of millions of people. It serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of foreign intervention, the fragility of state structures, and the devastating impact of war on ordinary civilians. The people of Iraq continue to endure the aftermath of this conflict, and the road to stability and reconciliation remains long and uncertain.